The first thing I saw when I came back to life was the number 7 glowing in the corner of a giant screen. Not a hospital ceiling. Not darkness. Not my mother's face. A tiny white number inside the presenter view on the podium monitor, waiting beside the thumbnail of the slide I had once erased from my own future. My right hand was wrapped around the remote clicker. My left palm rested on the printed speech pages, the same pages I had once read with a hollow space, where the truth should have been. The auditorium lights were hot enough to make my blazer stick to my back. The microphone smelled faintly of metal and someone else's mint gum. In front of me sat 300 people, students in formal uniforms, teachers with competition folders, donors with glossy programs, parents holding phones just below eye level, and 5 judges behind a long table that made the stage feel less like a platform and more like a witness stand. Behind me, slide 6 filled the projection screen, a photo of the old footbridge over Marlow Creek, washed gray by morning rain. I knew the next click would bring up slide 7. I knew because, in my first life, I had not clicked. In my first life, Mr. Julian Vale, director of the Future Voices Oratory Prize and father of the girls scheduled to speak after me, leaned beside the stage stairs 2 minutes before my presentation and whispered, "Skip slide 7, Sienna. My daughter needs that evidence, and you are strong enough without it." I skipped it. I read my speech with the missing slide buried in my throat. His daughter, Corinne Vale, presented after me using my evidence badly enough to look original and polished enough to win. I became the girl with the moving speech that lacked proof. Years later, I died in a council hearing room after a faulty ceiling panel collapsed during a storm while I was giving testimony about the same neglected creek crossing. My last thought, ridiculous and precise, was, I should have shown slide 7. Now, the auditorium waited. The clicker was in my hand. Mr. Vale stood in the wings, pale already, because he had seen my thumb hovering. And this time I pressed forward. Slide 7 appeared behind me like a door opening in a locked house. It was not dramatic to look at, if you did not know what it cost. A scanned maintenance memo. A map of the flood route. A photograph of rust eating through the underside of the Marlow Creek footbridge. 3 pieces of evidence arranged cleanly, no decoration, no glittering transition, no inspirational quote. At the bottom, in small print I had made large enough for the judges but not so large it became ugly, was the line. Inspection warning issued 14 months before collapse risk designation was removed from public report. In my first life, that slide never appeared. Without it, my speech sounded emotional but unanchored, a scholarship girl talking about broken infrastructure in a suburb donors drove through but never entered. With it, the room changed. I felt the shift before I heard it. Programs stopped rustling. A judge lifted her pen. Someone in the front row inhaled sharply. Mr. Vale's hand tightened around the curtain rope in the wings. I looked at the audience, then at the text on my paper, and I read the sentence I had once swallowed. A community does not become unsafe because people fail to care. It becomes unsafe when the people with the reports decide the public does not need the details. That was where the real speech began. Not at my introduction, not at the pretty opening about crossing the creek every morning in school shoes, not at the story of my little brother counting the missing bolts in the bridge railing like they were teeth. Slide 7 was the spine. Slide 7 proved that Marlow Creek Bridge had not simply aged, not simply suffered from weather, not simply become one more sad suburban structure nobody had the budget to fix. It showed that someone had known. Someone had inspected. Someone had warned. Someone had softened the language before the report went public. Visible corrosion at load-bearing joints became routine maintenance recommended. Pedestrian crowding risk during school commute became peak usage observed. Temporary closure advised pending structural review became nothing at all because that line vanished between the internal memo and the public counsel summary. I had found the memo by accident while volunteering at the Marlow Community Legal Center, sorting digitized counsel files for a retired solicitor who believed teenagers could be trusted with scanners if they did not touch biscuits with document gloves. I had built my whole speech around that missing sentence. In my first life, Mr. Vale made me skip it so his daughter could borrow the discovery without carrying the danger of being first. In this life, the danger was already on the screen. I was not meant to stand on stages. That was the official story other people told with kind faces. I was more of a writer, more of a researcher, better when prepared. Very thoughtful, though perhaps too intense for public delivery. At Kingsley College, that was how teachers praised girls who did not look like ambassadors. I was there on a bursary stitched together from academic marks, community service, and the kind of financial hardship letter my mother hated signing because it reduced our lives to numbers and polite tragedy. My mother worked at a pathology lab intake desk, checking names on blood samples all day, then came home and checked my school forms at night with the same exhausted precision. My father had been a bus driver until chronic back pain took him off routes and pride took him out of most conversations. My little brother, Nico, was 10 and had the bright, suspicious eyes of a child who knew adults lied about money. We lived on the Marlow side of the creek, in a row of brick units where mold came back no matter how hard my mother scrubbed, and where every storm made everyone check the drains before making tea. The footbridge was our shortcut to the train, the library, the sports fields, the better supermarket, the side of town with trees planted for beauty instead of shade over parked cars. If the bridge closed, we walked 28 extra minutes along the road shoulder beside traffic that treated pedestrians like mistakes. The Future Voices Oratory Prize was supposed to reward civic courage. That phrase was printed everywhere, on the posters, on the programs, on the donor website, on the blue lanyards volunteers wore around the auditorium. Students delivered 8-minute speeches with 10 slides on a public issue affecting their community. The prize came with full final year tuition, a university public policy mentorship, a paid internship with the City Futures Institute, and publication of the winning speech in the regional newspaper. One winner. One student's voice elevated. I hated that word too. Elevated from where? From the suburbs everyone ignored until a competition needed authentic pain? Still, I wanted the prize. Wanting something from a flawed system does not make you foolish. It makes you alive inside it. My mother read the fellowship details and said, "Full tuition?" I nodded. She looked away, not fast enough to hide the tears. Nico asked whether that meant we could buy the good cereal. My mother told him not everything was about cereal. He said most things were. He was not wrong. Mr. Julian Vale ran the Future Voices program with the warmth of a man who had never been cold without choosing the jacket. He taught English and public speaking, wrote opinion pieces about youth leadership, and chaired 3 community boards that all had tasteful logos. He was handsome in an expensive, unhurried way, dark hair silvering at the temples, square glasses, perfectly fitted suits, a voice trained to make concern sound like action. Parents loved him because he made their children sound important. Principals loved him because he could turn student hardship into speeches donors applauded without feeling accused. Students loved him until they needed something he did not want to give. His daughter, Corinne Vale, was the program's unofficial star. Corinne had honey brown hair, stage-ready eyes, and a speaking voice that rose and fell like music lessons disguised as sincerity. She cried on cue, laughed on cue, paused on cue, and made every topic sound as if it had been waiting all its life for her to narrate it. She was not empty. I need that understood. Corinne was clever, hardworking, and genuinely moved by injustice in the abstract. But she had been taught to treat evidence as staging, pain as material, and other people's proximity to a problem as something she could borrow if she handled it more elegantly. Before the final, Corinne and I were the 2 favorites for different reasons. She was polish. I was substance. That is what her classmates said, as if both could not belong to the same girl. In the semi-final, Corinne spoke about food insecurity with a story about volunteering at a breakfast program. Her slides were soft gold and navy, full of hands passing toast, school bags on hooks, a child's drawing of the sun. Beautiful. Safe. My semi-final was about emergency heat shelters and why our suburb's cooling center closed at 5 p.m. during the worst heat wave of the year. My slides had maps, opening hours, temperature records, and one photo of elderly residents sitting outside the locked library because the air conditioning inside was off after hours. Afterward, Mr. Vale said, "You have power, Sienna, but power needs grace." I asked what that meant. He smiled. It means do not make the audience feel accused before they feel invited. I wrote that down because I still thought his advice existed to help me. Later, I learned some adults call it grace when they want the knife wrapped in ribbons so nobody notices the wound. The final topic had to connect a local issue to a larger civic principle. I chose Marlow Creek Bridge because every person in my suburb had a bridge story. The old man who crossed it with groceries until one plank lifted under his foot. The year 8 boys who jumped the broken railing because the path narrowed where rust ate the guard post. The mother who stopped using it with her pram after the third missing bolt. The school students who still crossed because the road route added nearly half an hour and buses were late whenever rain hit. The bridge was not a metaphor first. It was metal, timber, rust, water, commute, time. Then I found the memo, and it became something else. Evidence that public danger often begins as private language. Slide 7 was the memo slide. The one that turned complaint into accountability. I built my speech around it carefully. Slides 1 to 3 showed the bridge as lived experience. Slides 4 to 6 showed commute data, accident reports, and community photos. Slide 7 showed the internal warning. Slides 8 and 9 proposed repair funding, transparent risk reporting, and student route audits. Slide 10 ended with Nico's drawing of the bridge, where he had colored the missing bolts red and labeled them places adults forgot. It was a good speech. Not perfect. Better than perfect. Necessary. In my first life, Mr. Vale saw the deck during technical rehearsal. He had access because he was program director. He stood at the back of the auditorium while I clicked through slides, arms folded, expression unreadable. When slide 7 appeared, he did not move. That was how I knew something was wrong. Mr. Vale always reacted theatrically to student work, a nod, a finger to the chin, a murmured "there it is" when a phrase landed. On slide 7, nothing. After rehearsal, he asked me to send him the source file for backup. I did. Foolish? Maybe. Normal? Yes. Teachers ask for files. Students send them. Trust is built into the machinery before anyone misuses it. That evening, Corinne posted a photo on her story of her laptop with a blurred slide deck open and the caption, "Final tweaks with Dad." I did not think anything of it. In the first life, I still believed overlap meant shared concern. Now, reborn at the podium, I knew it meant my evidence had already been passed across a kitchen island. The first life demand came in the side corridor beside the stage stairs, 2 minutes before I was called. I stood there with my speech pages clipped together, my remote in hand, my mouth dry, my mother seated in the third row wearing her lab receptionist cardigan because she had come straight from work. Nico was beside her, waving too hard. Mr. Vale approached with a program folder under one arm. "Sienna," he said softly, small adjustment. I thought he meant microphone height. Yes. He looked toward the stage, then back at me. "Cheap slide shoe." I stared. Why? It is too inflammatory. It's verified. It shifts the tone from civic invitation to accusation. The whole point is that the warning was removed. And Corinne's speech addresses institutional opacity from a broader lens. There it was, though I did not understand fast enough. What does Corinne's speech have to do with my slide? His expression tightened. She needs the evidence framed responsibly. You are too close to the issue. My face went hot. It's my evidence. It is counsel evidence. I found it. And you'll still deliver a strong speech without it. Then he leaned closer.
"Cheap slide shoe, Sienna."
My daughter needs that evidence, and you are strong enough without it. The threat did not sound like a threat until he began listing the things he could touch. My bursary review. My recommendation for the City Futures mentoring program. My mother's contract with the pathology provider that serviced the school health center. Nico's after-school literacy place in the outreach program Mr. Vale's board funded. My tone in previous speeches. The possibility that I could be seen as exploiting confidential documents for personal advantage if I displayed the memo without proper context. He said he was protecting me from reputational harm. He said Corinne had the distance to handle the material constructively. He said the judges wanted leadership, not anger. In my first life, I looked at my mother in the third row, at Nico waving, at the donors in the front, at Mr. Vale's hand resting on my slide clicker, as if he already owned it, and I nodded. I skipped slide 7. The screen jumped from the bridge photo to the policy proposal, and the whole speech sagged invisibly. I still spoke well.
People still clapped.
One judge even said, "Your lived connection is compelling, but the evidentiary chain feels incomplete." Then Corinne presented after me, clicked to a slide with the memo softened into pastel blue, called it a case study in communication breakdown, and won. Losing did not end my life. That is what made the theft so hard to explain. I still graduated. I still found work. I still wrote. But the scholarship went to Corinne. The internship went to Corinne. The newspaper printed her speech. The Marlow Creek Bridge was repaired eventually after a child fell through a weakened plank and broke his ankle. The council called it accelerated maintenance. My mother kept working. Nico lost his outreach place when funding changed. I became a communications assistant for a public agency, writing safety notices in language designed to be clear without making anyone liable. Later, I became a speechwriter for counselors, then an advocate, then the woman who stood at public hearings holding reports nobody wanted read aloud. Corinne became a policy commentator. She wrote a column at 26 about the ethics of listening to communities and included a paragraph about the bridge speech that launched her career. She never named me. Mr. Vale became a university lecturer on youth civic voice. I saw him once at a forum about transparency. He said, "The challenge is helping young advocates transform anger into constructive trust." I almost stood up and asked whether stolen slides counted as constructive. I did not. I had learned, badly, to survive by choosing rooms carefully. The room that killed me was a council hearing room during another storm. I was 35. The building was old, leaking, scheduled for repairs pending budget review. We were presenting evidence about unsafe community infrastructure, including a walkway near the same creek system. Rain hit the roof so hard microphones hissed. Halfway through my statement, a ceiling panel bowed above the side gallery. Someone shouted. I looked up. Water burst through. Lights flickered, metal framing gave way, and part of the suspended ceiling came down. It was not a grand disaster. It was a stupid one. A maintenance issue. A known leak. An ignored report. History has a talent for repeating itself with cheaper materials. I pushed a teenager away from the falling panel. Something struck the back of my head. The floor came up. The last thing I heard was someone yelling for the evacuation plan. My last thought, as papers spread across wet carpet, was slide 7. Show it. Then the auditorium lights burned above me again, the clicker warmed in my hand, and the tiny number 7 waited in presenter view. The first pattern interruption came when the screen flickered. For half a second, slide 7 dimmed, then returned. In my first life, I might have panicked. In this one, I smiled into the microphone and said, "Even the projector is uncomfortable with transparency." The audience laughed. Not loudly. Enough. Laughter did something important. It made the slide belong to the room before Mr. Vale could make it seem like an accident. I continued. But discomfort is not a reason to skip evidence. It is a reason to slow down and look carefully. A judge wrote that down. I hoped she did. I moved to slide 8 only after 35 seconds, long enough that every phone in the audience could photograph the memo if they wanted. Mr. Vale's control depended on the slide passing unseen. I made it linger. The rest of the speech became sharper because slide 7 held the weight. I proposed 3 changes. First, public-facing infrastructure summaries had to include the strongest safety recommendation from internal reports, not only the softest acceptable phrase. Second, school commute routes needed independent risk audits because children and low-income pedestrians use shortcuts differently from planners and cars. Third, council maintenance dashboards had to identify when warnings were downgraded and by whom. I did not shout. I did not cry. I read the lines I had built, and when I reached slide 10, Nico's drawing, I let my voice soften. My brother drew the missing bolts red because he thought adults forgot them. Children often explain negligence more honestly than committees do. They do not say deferred maintenance when they mean a railing came loose. They do not say routine recommendation when they mean someone should close the bridge before a child falls. My mother was crying by then, but quietly. Nico was sitting straighter than I had ever seen him, as if his drawing on the screen had made him taller. I ended with the final sentence I had kept hidden in both lives until that moment. Public safety begins when reports stop being written for the comfort of the people who ignored them. For 1 second, silence. Then applause. Not polite, not explosive, but serious. The kind of applause people give when they are still processing whether clapping is enough. The judges did not smile much.
Good.
Smiling judges are often enjoying the performance more than the argument. Professor Helena Quill, the external public policy judge, leaned toward her microphone.
Thank you, Sienna.
We will begin questions. Mr. Vale shifted in the wings. He had not expected questions on slide 7 to happen while I still owned it. Professor Quill asked, "How did you obtain the internal memo?" "Through digitized council files made available to the Marlow Community Legal Center for Public Infrastructure Review," I said. "Was it confidential?"
No.
"It was misfiled, but not restricted." I verified the document number with the file index. Judge 2, a donor with a council background, asked whether displaying the memo risked oversimplifying complex budget constraints. "Budget constraints are real," I said. "But the slide is not about demanding instant repairs. It is about honest risk communication. If a bridge cannot be repaired immediately, residents still deserve the accurate warning." Judge 3 asked what I would say to officials afraid that publicizing severe internal warnings could create panic. "Panic often comes from discovering the truth late," I said. "Trust comes from being told early enough to act." I saw Professor Quill nod. I saw Mr. Vale look down. Then came the question that sealed it. "Did anyone advise you not to include slide 7? Professor Quill asked. The auditorium became a held breath. I had not planned this. Or maybe I had, in the way survival teaches you to prepare for the question nobody asks in the first life. Mr. Vale's eyes snapped toward the stage. Corinne's face emptied. I looked at Professor Quill. "Yes."
Who?
"Mr. Vale." A murmur moved through the room. My mother went very still. Nico looked confused, then angry on my behalf. "What reason was given?" Professor Quill asked. I kept my voice steady. He said it was too inflammatory and that his daughter needed the evidence framed responsibly. He told me to skip slide 7 because I was strong enough without it. The microphone made the sentence larger than my body. Mr. Vale stepped forward half a pace in the wings, then stopped because every eye in the auditorium knew exactly where the sound had come from. Professor Quill did not look at him. "Thank you. No further questions for me at this stage." At this stage. Beautiful phrase. It meant the room had changed legal shape. I left the podium with my legs shaking so badly, I nearly missed the stage step. The volunteer took my clicker. Corinne was next. In the first life, she had touched my arm before going on stage and whispered, "You were amazing," with a pity that felt like perfume over smoke. This time, she did not touch me. She stared at me, not with hatred, not even guilt yet, but panic. Her speech title appeared on the stage monitor. When systems stop listening, Youth Trust and Public Risk. Slide 1 had a photo of a city meeting room. Slide 2, a quote about transparency. Slide 3, a soft map. Slide 4, community voices. Slide 5, institutional language. Slide 6, a blurred bridge photo. Slide 7, yes, of course, was a redesigned version of my memo evidence. Same document, different colors, softer headings. My stomach turned. Corinne looked at the monitor, then at the wings where her father stood, his face gray beneath the stage lights. "Candidate Corinne Vale," the moderator announced. "Please begin." She walked to the podium. Her posture was perfect. Her cue cards were perfect. Her first sentence was perfect. "Trust is not broken by bad news," she began. "It is broken when people discover the news was made polite before it reached them." In the first life, that line had won a murmur of admiration. This time, it landed like stolen silver dropped on a tile floor. The audience had just heard my slide 7. They had seen my document. They had heard me say Mr. Vale told me to skip it because Corinne needed the evidence. Now Corinne's polished opening sounded less like insight and more like echo. She continued through slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. Her voice trembled only slightly. She could still recover if the speech had enough of her own spine. It did not. Her whole structure had been built around arriving at slide 7, as if she had discovered the memo herself and then transforming it into a broader meditation on youth trust. But the room had already met the memo through me. When she clicked to slide 7, the screen displayed the softened version of my evidence. A murmur moved through the auditorium. Not loud. Worse. Recognizing. Professor Quill leaned forward. Corinne saw her. That was when her throat closed. This document, Corinne said, shows that internal communication can sometimes, she swallowed, can sometimes make public language more. She looked down at her cue cards. The word she wanted was digestible. I knew because Mr. Vale loved that word. He used it in workshops, make hard truths digestible. But in that moment, after my speech, digestible sounded obscene. Corinne knew it too. She skipped the word. More accessible, she said. Then shook her head slightly because that was also wrong. The memo had not been made accessible. It had been weakened. More appropriate, she tried. The audience went silent. Her hand tightened around the clicker. The screen behind her glowed with the stolen slide. She looked at her father in the wings. He gave the smallest nod, the kind meant to restart a rehearsed child. It did not work. Corinne opened her mouth. No sound came. She choked. Not coughing. Not physically. Her voice failed because the sentence required a lie she could no longer make beautiful. The moderator waited. 10 seconds. 15. Professor Quill said gently, "Take a breath, Corinne." That kindness made it worse. Corinne inhaled, looked back at the slide, and whispered into the microphone, "I can't explain the document." The room heard every syllable. Mr. Vale closed his eyes. His daughter had not merely forgotten a line. She had admitted the central evidence was not hers to hold. Judge 2 asked, perhaps trying to help, perhaps trying to test, "Did you locate this memo during your own research?" Corinne's face flushed. "I received the file." "From whom?" Silence. Her fingers shook against the cue cards. "My father." Mr. Vale went pale. Not the theatrical kind. The real kind, where color drains so quickly the face looks suddenly older. The auditorium shifted. Phones lowered. Teachers stared. My mother's hand found Nico's shoulder. I stood in the side aisle, half hidden by the curtain, and felt no joy. Not cleanly. The title says his daughter choked, and she did. But what I saw was a girl raised to perform borrowed conviction, discovering, under lights, that the words in her mouth had an owner. The session was suspended after Corinne's answer. Adults love the phrase brief recess, when reality has begun moving faster than their plans. Students were escorted to the foyer. Judges stayed inside. Mr. Vale disappeared behind the stage doors with the principal and Professor Quill. Corinne sat alone in the second row, cue cards in her lap, staring at the screen as technicians switched it off. I wanted to avoid her. I also wanted to demand why she had taken my slide. Both impulses felt childish and deserved. Before I could choose, my mother reached me. She hugged me hard, then held me back by the shoulders. "Did he really tell you to skip it?" "Yes." "Before you spoke?" "Yes." Her face changed into the expression she used when pathology samples arrived with mismatched names. Controlled fury, because someone had endangered truth through carelessness or arrogance, and either way people could be hurt. "Did you record him?" she asked. I had not, because the first life demand happened before I understood the need. In this life, I had clicked before he could corner me again. "No," my mother looked toward the closed stage door. "Then your slide did." Nico, standing beside her, said, "Your slide punched him." My mother and I both looked at him. He shrugged. "It did." He was 10. He was correct. Professor Quill called me into the green room 30 minutes later. My mother came with me because she had developed, over many years of school meetings, the posture of a woman who would rather be considered difficult than absent. Present were Professor Quill, Principal Ashford, Mr. Vale, Corinne, a competition administrator, my mother, and me. Mr. Vale had recovered some color, but not authority. Corinne looked as if she had cried in the bathroom and hated herself for doing it. Principal Ashford began with careful language. Serious concern, overlap between presentations, possible misunderstanding of source sharing, emotional pressure of finals, need to protect students. I knew those phrases from the first life. They were the verbal equivalent of softening, temporary closure advised into routine maintenance recommended. Professor Quill interrupted after 30 seconds. I need a factual sequence, she said. Sienna, did you create slide 7? Yes. When? 3 days before technical rehearsal, after verifying the memo with the Community Legal Center file index. Did you send your deck to Mr. Vale? Yes, at his request for backup after rehearsal. Did he advise you to skip slide 7? Yes. Mr. Vale inhaled. I advised caution around potentially sensitive material. Professor Quill turned to him. Did you give the same memo or slide content to Corinne? Silence. Corinne looked at her hands. Mr. Vale said, we discussed public documents relevant to her theme. Did you disclose to Sienna that Corinne would use the same document? The students had overlapping civic concerns. That is not an answer. The room cooled around her voice. Corinne spoke before her father could. He gave it to me. Everyone turned. Her voice was hoarse. The memo. The slide structure, too. He said Sienna had found something strong but was too close to it, and that I could make the argument broader. Mr. Vale's face hardened. Corinne. One word. Father, warning, command. She flinched, then kept going. He told me she might not use it because it could hurt her tone. My mother made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Her tone. Professor Quill looked at Corinne. Did you understand the memo independently? Corinne wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, angry at the tear. I thought I did. Then Sienna explained it first, and I realized I only knew what Dad told me to say about it. Mr. Vale stood. This is becoming punitive toward my daughter. Professor Quill did not raise her voice. Sit down, Mr. Vale. He did not sit immediately. That was a mistake. Principal Ashford said, quieter, Julian. He sat. There are few sights more satisfying than a man who built rooms around his voice being told to return to a chair. The investigation did not need weeks. It had files. My original deck upload timestamp. Mr. Vale's backup request. Corinne's deck metadata showing slide 7 created after he accessed mine. The visual similarity between my slide and hers. Professor Quill's live notes. Corinne's admission. Mr. Vale's pre-presentation contact with me, which he framed as guidance but could not explain without sounding like exactly what he was. The judges ruled that my presentation stood as delivered and Corinne's was invalidated for improper assistance and unattributed use of another finalist's evidence. Mr. Vale was removed from the judging and program administration, pending a school review. The final prize announcement was delayed until evening, but everyone knew by then. Auditorium stories travel faster than official emails. Slide 7 became a whisper in the foyer, then a message in group chats, then a phrase people used with eyebrows raised whenever a teacher walked past. Someone wrote, "Don't skip 7" on a napkin and taped it under a water table. Teenagers are brutal archivists. The award was announced in the auditorium after dinner break. The crowd was smaller but sharper, the way audiences become when they know they are witnessing consequences. Mr. Vale was absent. Corinne sat with her mother near the back, no longer in the finalist row. I respected that she came. I hated that part of me respected it. Professor Quill walked to the podium with the envelope. The Future Voices Oratory Prize recognizes civic speech grounded in evidence, clarity, and ethical responsibility, she said. I loved that she added evidence first. This year's winner is Sienna Arlo. My knees weakened. My mother covered her mouth. Nico shouted slide 7 because he had never been trained for decorum and may he never be. People laughed, then clapped harder. I walked to the stage. The certificate felt too smooth. The scholarship letter inside the folder felt heavier than paper. Full tuition. Policy mentorship. City Futures internship. Publication. A future returned through a slide. Professor Quill asked if I wanted to say anything. I had not prepared because in the first life, I had watched Corinne receive the trophy, while I smiled with my missing slide lodged in my chest. This time, I stepped to the microphone and looked at the dark screen behind me. "Thank you," I said. "I hope every student here remembers that evidence is not rude because it makes powerful people uncomfortable." That was it. Enough. My mother stood first. Nico stood on his chair until she pulled him down. The applause felt less like celebration than permission. Not for me alone. For the room to admit what it had seen. The official review changed the Future Voices program more than the school wanted to admit. Slide decks had to be submitted directly to an external portal, not through program directors. Staff relatives could not supervise finalists. Source logs became mandatory. Technical rehearsal files were watermarked by candidate. Any advice to remove or alter evidence had to be given in writing and shared with a judging panel. Finalists had access to a source dispute process. Boring rules. Beautiful rules. Every year after that, some student complained that the source log was annoying.
Good.
Annoying systems often protect the person nobody plans to believe. Mr. Vale resigned from program leadership before the review concluded. Officially, he wanted to focus on independent youth advocacy consulting. Unofficially, the school discovered enough file sharing irregularities from previous years to understand Slide 7 was not his first act of elegant borrowing. His daughter had benefited most visibly, but other polished students had received thematic guidance suspiciously similar to competitors' research. The school did not publish everything. Schools rarely do, but enough leaked to make Mr. Vale's name taste different in rooms that once welcomed it. Corinne did not return for the rest of term. I thought that would be the end of her in my story. It was not. Near the start of year 12, she came to Marlow Creek Bridge reopening ceremony. The council had rushed repairs after the speech went public, partly because the newspaper printed Slide 7 under the headline "Teen Speech Reveals Downgraded Bridge Warning." They hated that headline. I loved it enough to cut out a copy and put it in Nico's memory box. At the ceremony, officials wore hard hats for cameras, as if they had personally tightened bolts. I stood near the new railing with my mother and Nico, trying not to roll my eyes at the counselor's speech about proactive maintenance. Corinne appeared beside the information table, hair tied back, no stage makeup, holding a folded letter. "Can I speak to you?" she asked. My mother looked at me. Nico whispered, "Slide thief." My mother lightly smacked the back of his head without looking away from Corinne. I stepped aside. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Corinne said.
Good.
Everyone seemed to learn that opening eventually. "I knew the slide came from your deck." I told myself evidence belonged to the issue, not the person who found it. That was convenient. I said nothing. She looked at the bridge. "When you explained it, I realized I didn't know what the memo meant. I knew how it was supposed to feel in a speech." That sentence was more honest than I expected. "Your father taught you that?" "Yes." "You accepted it?" "Yes." No defense. No tears yet. Her hands twisted the letter. "I transferred out of the program. I'm not competing this year." "Why tell me?" "Because I am trying to learn how to research before speaking." She handed me the letter. I wrote to Professor Quill. I told her everything I remembered about Dad using other students' files. I should have done it earlier. I took the letter, but did not open it. "Yes," I said. "You should have." She nodded. "I know." The wind moved across the creek, rattling the new rail. "For what it's worth," she said, "your brother's drawing made me understand the bridge more than my whole speech." I looked back at Nico, who was trying to balance a biscuit on his elbow. That is because Nico doesn't optimize for donors. Corinne laughed once, then cried. I let her cry, without comforting her. That was the boundary I could offer. The scholarship changed my life in ways that sounded small until you lived them. Tuition disappeared. My mother stopped taking extra weekend intake shifts. Nico stayed in the literacy program, then became unbearable about public speaking because he decided our family was now civically important. I interned at the City Futures Institute, where I learned that reports have politics inside them long before speeches reveal them. I worked with planners, engineers, lawyers, community organizers, and one terrifying data analyst named May who could find buried risk in a spreadsheet faster than most people found typos. She taught me to ask 3 questions of every public document. What was the strongest internal warning? Who softened it? Who had to live with the softer version? Those questions became the structure of my career. I studied public policy, then infrastructure accountability, then community risk communication.
Of course I did.
Some girls survive stolen slides and become speakers. Some become investigators. I became the person who asks why slide 7 was missing from the public deck. Years later, I returned to the Future Voices final as an external judge. The auditorium was renovated, which meant it looked exactly the same, but smelled more expensive. The stage had a new projection screen, the podium was lower, and the presenter view still showed tiny slide numbers in the corner. I stood there during rehearsal and watched a nervous Year 11 girl click to slide 7 of her speech about public transport deserts. She flinched when the slide appeared because it contained a table of canceled bus routes and ministerial promises. "Is this too much?" she asked. "Is it accurate?" I asked. "Yes." "Then it is not too much. It is load-bearing." She smiled nervously and wrote that on her hand. During the final, she showed the slide. A donor shifted uncomfortably. I gave her full marks for evidence use. Circle closed? Not really. Circles are too neat. But something had become harder to steal. Mr. Vale resurfaced, as men with reputational damage often do, under softer branding. He ran workshops called Storytelling for Impact and wrote posts about helping young people move beyond blame. I saw him once at a conference on civic education. He approached during a coffee break, looking older, still handsome, still wearing the same kind of square glasses. "Sienna Arlo," he said. "You have become quite the accountability specialist." "Yes. You always had force. You tried to make me skip the slide that proved it." His smile thinned. "I tried to protect a young speaker from overexposure. You tried to protect your daughter from comparison." The words landed. He glanced around, checking who might hear. Old habits. Corinne suffered after that day. Corinne learned to research. "You are harsh." "No," I said. "I am cited." For a moment, the conference noise seemed to fade around us. He looked like the man in the wings again, watching slide 7 appear where he had planned a gap. Then he said, "You built a career on resentment." I said, "You built one on removing evidence and calling it tone." He left his coffee untouched. Small victories are sometimes petty. I allow myself a few. My mother eventually opened a small document prep and community advocacy shop near the station. She called it Slide 7. I told her subtlety had died in our family years ago. She said good. Subtlety was where men hid edits. The shop helped people print appeal forms, write complaint letters, scan rental photos, organize maintenance records, and prepare short speeches for council meetings. Nico painted a sign behind the counter. "If it proves the point, don't skip it." People laughed, then brought in evidence they had been afraid was too much. Mold photos, broken stair rails, unanswered emails, medical appointment delays, bus cancellations, school notices, pay slips. My mother would tap the stack and say, "This is your slide 7. She became locally famous for refusing to let anyone submit a complaint without attachments. "Feelings matter," she would say, "but documents make feelings harder to ignore." Corinne became a researcher. Not famous. Not polished in the old way. Better. She worked for a community legal archive and later wrote an article about ethical sourcing and youth advocacy. She sent it to me before publication with a note. "I cited the Marlowe speech, but did not name you without permission." I gave permission on the condition she included the phrase, "improperly reused evidence."
She did.
That mattered. Not enough to erase. Enough to record. We never became friends, but sometimes we shared sources. That is a strange relationship, maybe the only honest one available to us. Once, years later, she admitted, "I still freeze before slide 7 in any presentation." I said, "Good." She looked startled. I added, "That means you know to check whether it is yours." She nodded slowly. "Fair."
It was.
Now, when students ask how to give a powerful speech, I do not start with voice, posture, eye contact, or beautiful openings. I start with slide 7. Every speech has one. It may not literally be the seventh slide. Sometimes it is a chart, a quote, a photograph, a number, a page from a report, a witness statement, a name. It is the piece that changes the speech from performance into argument. It is the part someone will call too negative, too complicated, too inflammatory, too specific, too risky, too much. They may be right that it is uncomfortable. They may even be right that it needs context, care, or clearer framing. But if removing it makes your speech easier for powerful people and emptier for the people who live the harm, do not confuse editing with erasure. Ask who benefits if the audience never sees it. Ask who speaks after you. Ask why your closeness to the issue makes you too emotional, while someone else's distance makes them balanced. Then click. So if you ever stand at a podium with your thumb over the clicker, and someone important tells you to skip the slide that makes your argument undeniable, pause. Not because you should obey. Pause so you can feel the full shape of the moment. Hear the room. See the screen. Know that the next click may cost you comfort, but the missing slide will cost you more. Then press forward. Let the evidence appear. Let the silence do its work. Let the person who planned to borrow your proof discover what happens when the owner reads it first. And when their polished speaker reaches the borrowed part and cannot make it sound true, do not call it cruelty. Call it the microphone finally returning to the right voice.